welcome to the New Ulm Forum. My name is Ruth Ann Webster. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and together with Nucat, we are bringing these programs of interest to the community so that we can help people who are listening understand what's going on in our community. Now today, our guest is Jean Prochniak, Brown County Auditor Treasurer, and our topic is voting. There is a primary election set for Tuesday, August 14th. The general election is Tuesday, November 6th. Jean, our guest, Jean Prochniak, is the top election administrator for Brown County. Now, Jean, folks are going to be listening to us talk about elections and details about elections for the next 20 minutes or so. But if people, after they listen to this program, have any questions, are you available to answer those questions?
We certainly are always available to our voters to respond to whatever their questions are, and we can direct them to the appropriate spots to get their answers.
And exactly where is your office?
Our office is located in the Brown County Courthouse. We're on the second floor of the courthouse, the corner of Center and State Street. You will go on the elevator, and once you get up there, you will find signs that direct you right to our office. So,
and are you the only person who can answer questions, or are there other people in your office?
Oh gosh, no. We certainly have a well-trained staff. I think my group understands elections, and if there's a question that's posed to us that we don't have the answer for immediately, we certainly will get back to the questioner and get them the appropriate information.
And finally, can people call?
They can call. Our main office number is 507-233-6613.
And that number is also in the phone book under Brown County offices,
correct?
It
is.
Okay, good. Now, just by way of introducing this topic, the topics today include registering to vote. In other words, how do you become a registered voter? And in particular, Jean wants to discuss the state elections grant, which has allowed Brown County to purchase new equipment to manage the list of registered voters. So we'll be talking about registering to vote, becoming a registered voter. And second, we'll be talking about voting before the actual election day, sometimes called early voting. There's actually two areas of early voting. One is called a no excuse absentee ballot, and the other is actual early voting. And there's a difference between the two, which we'll be talking about to Jean. And then third, we'll be talking about same-day voting, where the typical classic way where you go to the polling place. We've got a little bit of a situation here in New Ulm because there's been, the city of New Ulm has consolidated polling places. And then finally, we'll talk about some of our rural voters. Some of the townships have decided to switch to something called mail-in ballots. So those are our four topics: registering to vote, voting early, voting at your polling place, and mail-in ballots for some of the townships in Brown County. So let's get started.
Sounds good.
Jean, can you give us the basics about voter registration?
Well, sure I can. To register to vote, a person must be a U.S. citizen. They have to be at least 16 years, excuse me, here I go already, at least 18 years of age on election day, and a resident of the state of Minnesota for 20 days. A convicted felon is restricted from voting, registering, and unless they have finished all parts of their felony sentence.
Okay. Now, in Minnesota, people can pre-register, is that right? Can you talk about that?
Yes. July 24th is the last day to pre-register to vote for the primary election. We encourage voters to to do the voter pre-registration, because at that point their name will automatically appear on the roster, and it'll expedite their process in the polling place.
Okay. And once a person is registered, that person stays registered, right?
They do, as long as you are a voter that has voted in an election in the last 4 years, your name will remain on that roster. So come out and vote. That's what we need.
All right. And if you move, do you have to change your registration?
You do.
Okay.
You do. And change the name if you get married.
Right. Or change your name for any other reason. Now, one thing, our League of Women Voters spent quite a bit of time studying the process of voting in the last couple of years, and something that I learned during that study is that the database of registered voters is or has become a statewide system managed by the Secretary of State's office. Can you talk about how that works and how your office interacts with the Secretary of State's office?
Certainly. The acronym for it's called SVRS. That's their acronym, which represents the State Voter Registration System. SVRS is a sophisticated database. It maintains all of the voters' information, their name, address, social security number, driver's license number, and their date of birth, which are all forms of identifying that it is you who is coming to the polls to vote. A lot of cross-checks are done within that database to compare to the Department of Health to keep records updated for people who have passed away. It is tied to the Department of Corrections so that we know if someone is a felon and that the voter has to be challenged. And it's also tied to the driver's license system so that as voters or as people go to renew driver's license, they can update their voter registration at that time also. So all of those databases kind of work together and keep the system up to date along with information we get in our office that brings it up to date.
And so, because it's a complicated database, I assume that people can go online and register to vote with the Secretary of State. Is that correct?
You can go to either our website or directly to the Secretary of State's website, fill out a form online, and if that is done, when a voter does go to the polls, because they haven't physically shown their license to somebody, and it has not, if it didn't get verified through the driver's license programs, then they would have to show their ID at the polling place. Otherwise, no ID is required to vote.
Okay. And people can also register to vote at your office, correct?
Certainly,
Okay.
certainly.
Good. And then your office sends that information.
We update it right in the system.
Right, all right. And people can fill out forms and deliver the forms to your office, right?
Most certainly.
Well, and it's important to register, but it's also possible to do same-day registration. Is that correct?
Yes, Minnesota is one of 16 states that allows same-day registration, along with the District of Columbia. Yeah, we want all people to have the opportunity to vote. So Minnesota makes it available.
Okay. Now, we're talking about the list of registered voters. Now, up until this year, when a person goes in to vote, that list of registered voters was a big blue book, right? With names on it and that sort of thing. Is that going to change?
It sure is. It sure is. We are going to actually use some technology in the polling place. We purchased electronic rosters. There'll be 3 of them in each polling site within the city of New Ulm. A voter will just come in and give the poll worker their name and address, and the poll worker will put in the first 3 characters of their last name and the first 2 characters of their first name, validate the address, click on the name, and a voter receipt will come out. The voter will be asked to sign that because Minnesota still requires a wet signature on the oath.
Okay.
So, but it's fast. You don't have to stand in a particular line by your first name of your first letter of your last name. But so you go to the shortest line, and you should be able to get through quite quickly.
Okay. And you'll be demonstrating new system at a later event by the Nucat, is that right?
That is the plan.
All right, that is the plan. It is this. So voters who come in can expect to have something different. Well, that's great. And that leads us to something that I know you are interested to talk about, and that is the election grant. Can you just give our listeners sort of a timeline of how that grant came into effect and what it was used for, and how you experienced that?
The 2017 Minnesota legislature authorized $7 million to be split among the counties in Minnesota. It was based, you got a percentage based on the number of precincts that were in your county. And Brown County just got a little over $59,000 to spend on election equipment. If we purchased poll books, the grant would fund 75% of that purchase, and on other election equipment, it would fund 50%. So we had to apply for the grant. It came to us, and so we purchased the 18 poll books for our larger communities, and we have 6 DS200s that we purchased along with a central count. So we spent more than the $59,000, but it is.
What is a DS200?
A DS200 is your vote tabulator that's at the precinct.
Okay, all right. So in addition to the electronic system of keeping track of registered voters, there is also a new counting system.
It is. It's pretty much it. I don't think the voter will recognize any difference at the polling place. It's just a more reliable machine. Our other election equipment had aged, and people get concerned about computers that are over 10 years old.
Right.
They start to break down, and you can't have that on election day.
Right. And I think I watched that being demonstrated.
You've seen some of that stuff,
right.
You bet.
It's fast. And we'll get back to counting votes at the end here. We're working our way through this. Now, you've got this new equipment, and I read in the journal that there's been quite a bit of training for your election judges. How has that been going?
We just finished our first round of election judge training. We had 4 sessions offered, and one was geared directly more for townships, and the other 3 for our larger cities. And yeah, it went really well. We're going to have another training session on the poll books. We want our election judges to become comfortable with them. They're new, and we want them to make sure that they present confidence when they're in the polling place, because that's what our voters expect.
Okay, good. Well, now, just before we leave the topic of registering to vote, let's go over the date again. What is the deadline for pre-registering to vote for this primary election coming up on Tuesday, August 14th?
That was July 24th.
Okay, so July 24th. So, well, we don't know when people are going to be watching this, so July 24th.
Yeah, but don't let it stop you from voting.
Right,
come in anyway. We'll take care of you.
Come in and register.
You bet.
Good. And now let's move on to early voting before the election day. And as I said in my introduction, there is no excuse absentee voting, and then there's actual early voting. Can you explain how each of those works and how they're different and how they're the same?
Okay, an absentee ballot, a voter can come in and request an AB ballot. That began June 29th, somewhere in there, June 26th. And so the voters have been coming in, they request a ballot, and they fill out a form, and everything goes in an envelope on the no excuse voting. When it gets to direct balloting, that means that it's 7 days before the election, and the voter can choose to either use the envelope method, which they have the right to do, or they can directly drop their ballot into the tabulator and have it counted right away. We don't see those counts. We can't take a total on that machine until 8 o'clock on election night. So we certainly don't know any more than anyone else until we take totals.
And now, as I understand, one of the main differences from the voter's point of view is that if a person has submitted an absentee ballot, that person can change her mind. Is that right?
The people that use the envelopes
Yes.
method of voting,
Yes.
up until the 7 days before the
Okay.
election, have the right to come in and have their ballot pulled.
Okay.
Because we have not taken them apart yet.
Right, and they haven't been put into the voting machine.
Right, so
Okay.
we can still do that.
Yeah,
Once
okay.
the 7 days are there, then
Then you're
your
done.
decision has been made.
All right, good. Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, you said that no excuse absentee ballots are already available, right? And can you just give us, because is it how many weeks before an election? Or how many days
It's-
before election? I'm sorry.
I think it's 46 days
Okay.
is when we open up that absentee voting.
Because the rules, as far as the timeline goes, the same rules apply for the primary election as they do for the
They
general
do,
election.
so 46 days before
Right.
any election,
Right,
people can
okay.
begin voting.
Okay, and then early voting is that 7 business days or 7 weekdays?
7 weekdays.
7 weekdays, so 1 week.
1 week.
Good, good. All right. And so people can come and they can register and they can vote. Good. All right. Now, just as a side note, there is a difference between a primary election and a general election. Is that as far as voting for one party or the other? Can you just explain that a little bit?
Sure. A primary election, a voter cannot cross party lines, and we do our very best to make sure that our election judges were trained to explain to the people that don't cross party lines. We have posters within the voting booth to remind people to not cross party lines. And in our small precincts where they don't have a vote tabulator, there's another sign there that says, check your ballot one more time. So that's important. Otherwise, there really isn't any differences. We narrow down the number of people that are going to be on the general ballot.
Well, and just before we leave that issue of primary elections, in the city elections and the county elections, those elections are not partisan elections.
They are not.
And so in that ballot, it's simply a matter of choosing one of the persons who are running.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and if a person is really coming to the polls because of the local, and they made a mistake on the party
state- on the
designation
statewide.
part, the vote still can be counted for the
okay.
local races. It doesn't eliminate the whole ballot.
Okay.
Everything that's countable will be.
Oh, well, that's an interesting, I'm glad for that, because we do have some interesting primary elections
We
at
do.
at a local level. So
Yep.
all the more reason to vote.
Exactly.
All right. So talking about voting on election day, and this has to do right now with something that's going on in New Ulm. And I know that the City Council made a change in New Ulm where prior to this election, there were 2 polling places in each of the 4 precincts, and for a total of 8 polling places. And now the decision has been made to reduce that to 4. Can you just go over those changes for folks, and also talk about how your efforts to make sure people understand? So, and we have a little graphic here.
We do. We worked with the City of New Ulm to come up with a way to consolidate the precincts. The only difference between our precincts really has to do with the commissioner races, and we don't have any in Brown County this year in New Ulm. So we were okay there without a problem. But we've got, we're going to vote by ward. So Ward 1 is going to be at Redeemer Church on the south end of town. Ward 2 is going to vote at the New Ulm Community Center, and Ward 3 is at the Civic Center, and Ward 4 is going to be at Harmon Park, that shelter down there.
Okay,
So
those are so rattle off those 4 polling places for us again.
we got the Redeemer Lutheran Church, New Ulm Community Center, New Ulm Civic Center, and Harmon Park Shelter.
Okay, and each one of those places should be open and available and handicap accessible, ready to vote.
They
Is that
checked
right?
them out carefully. They're very conscious
Okay.
of that.
All right, good. Now, would you talk a little bit about your efforts to notify people about these changes?
Yes, when a voter moves from one precinct to another, naturally, the state voter registration system generates a change of polling place card,
Okay.
and that's automatically sent to all voters within, that are affected. And so this year, there's quite a number of postcards that should be going out because we've had a lot of polling place changes. And we did that consolidation to cut down on the number of pieces of equipment that we needed to buy.
Right.
A little too expensive for the number of voters. Brown County isn't huge, and machines are expensive. So each of the machines is designed to handle 2,000 voters without a problem, and our wards will accommodate that. So we should be good.
Okay, and I do notice that Nicole Jorgensen, who's the election administrator for the city of New Ulm, had an article in the Journal where she talked about this. So, and I'm sure we'll be.
I think this map will be in the paper
more
right
than
around
once.
Election Day to
Right.
make sure people
Good.
know.
Good, and also I understand that polling place information is available online at the Secretary of State's office.
Yes.
And people can call you, and people can call the city, and okay, no excuse not to vote. All right.
We make it pretty easy.
All right, and your office will be open for people to call that day if
You
they're
bet.
confused. Good. All right. Well, that's the city of New Ulm, and then there's been some changes in some of the townships going to mail-in ballots exclusively. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We have 12 of our small precincts that have gone to mail balloting. It is the trend within the state. There are 69 counties that are using mail ballot process. It ends up being a little bit more reasonable to process votes through the mail, which sounds like, how can that be? But equipment is very expensive. So yeah, we've got 12, and we've got, I think, 5 or 6 new ones this year. And so we have mailed out postcards to them 1 week ahead of time before the ballots came to show them what the ballot was going to look like. Don't throw it away. We found that was our biggest hang up in the last time. So we decided we had to ramp up our education, and we did, and we're putting notices in the paper. We do things like this to make sure people know that those ballots are coming and they're real. They're not practice ballots.
Right. Good, good. Well, we've got a few more minutes, so I just want to add just a few topics. On the issue of election security, if anyone during the time of voting or registering feels like there's something amiss at the polling place or with regard to registered voters or something like that, is your office available, or how should people respond to that?
If any voter ever has any concerns about what happens in a polling place or in our office with regard to voting, certainly they have the right to file a complaint. You file the complaint with the Secretary of State's office. If it's a complaint regarding disabilities and being able, mobility kind of things, we do have a form, right? We send out to all the precincts. I have a form, and that gets submitted, and we forward it on to the state. So everything that happens there is important to us. We want it to be right. We want it to work well for the voters. So,
and on the issue of election security, Minnesota has paper ballots. Is that correct? And would you just talk about how those ballots are secured at the end of the election day, and how they're handled and managed and protected?
well, within the city of New Ulm, when the polls close, the election judges, 2 election judges in fact, will empty the locked ballot box and put them in a box that gets returned to our office. That box is sealed. All election judges at that polling place will sign that seal. They will have checked the ballot box to make sure that all ballots are there because they have to tie out in numbers. When the ballots are returned to the courthouse, we take them and we put them in a sealed room. It's got double locks on it, and the 2 people are required to enter that room during the 22-day contest period. So it is quite secure. We've taken measures to make sure that those ballots are protected.
And just, one final question. When you count ballots, they're counted at the courthouse, right?
In the city of New Ulm, the vote tabulator will have them counted.
Okay.
They come in counted. They bring a summary statement, and they had a results tape from their DS200.
Okay.
So they know who won in their precinct as they left.
Okay.
And that's okay, because they did it after 8 o'clock. They bring them up to us, and we compile those results. Our mail ballot precincts and our small precincts will be bringing their ballots to the courthouse, and we count them in a central count.
Okay.
And that machine will count 70 votes a minute, so we don't think we're going to be spending a lot of time there. We have to get familiar with the machine and get our processes down, but we'll have that ready by Election Day.
And the courthouse is open during the time that these counts are taking place,
Oh,
right?
and people are welcome to come in and watch. We obviously won't let people touch any ballots,
Right.
but you have the right to observe.
Well, and I've been there, and it's a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun.
Used to be there were cookies there.
Well, there's not going to be cookies. Oh, darn it. Oh, darn it. Well, let's just go through just one more time. We've got a primary election coming up, and that's
August 14th.
August 14th, and we've got a general election coming up.
November 6th.
November 6th. And as the League of Women Voters says, marching is not enough. You have to vote. Remember, voting is your duty.
And it's your voice.
It's your voice. And become a voter this fall, right, Jean?
Exactly.
All right, good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Thank you.
Good.